Good morning and welcome to the forum. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. It's a blessing to see you all here today. Each year we have a theme in the cathedral, and this year our theme is the gift. Last year our theme was technology, and Mark Gainey could fit into either of those subjects. He's both a gift and an expert in technology. He's the founder or co-founder and CEO of the online network Strava, the social network for athletes, a platform that connects a global community of athletes. He's also been in the trenches in Silicon Valley for over 20 years, has a lot of great experience and insight to share. Please join me in welcoming Mark Gainey. Mark, your family has been connected to this cathedral in many different ways. I think your grandfather laid some of the stonework that's in the floor of the cathedral. Do you remember that?
Well, a little before my time.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right. I've got two parents who, well, my father was born and raised just down the street, and my mom was on the peninsula. And you're right, my grandfather was in the limestone business, and so part of the limestone that sits right here in the cathedral, he's got his fingerprints on him.
Yeah, there's a certain section of the cathedral when I walk over it, I think of you and your family there.
Yeah.
You know, it does mean that you've got really deep roots in the Bay Area, and I wonder what it is that makes the Bay Area special. I mean, you've been other places, and you've certainly seen the Bay Area just change just in unbelievable ways during your lifetime. So what makes this a special place for innovation, for companies to get formed, for us culturally and politically too?
Yeah. So, quick clarification. Well, been here almost 30 years.
Missed your childhood.
My childhood was Reno, Nevada. So there's a little bit of Bay Area and sort of Western U.S. But you're right. I've been here since 1991. Came here after college. And specifically to your question, what makes it unique is somebody who's been an entrepreneur and somebody trying to build software companies in the Valley. There's this incredible mix that's very hard to actually put your finger on. But when you look at the academic institutions, you look at the access to capital, when you look at, frankly, just the other technology titans of industry. I mean, companies that go back now 40 and 50 years, they seem young, but they really are stalwarts of American industry at this point. It's been very hard for any other place in the world to replicate.
Right.
The other piece to it that I've told every entrepreneur is there's a unique willingness in Silicon Valley to help one another. To even if I've seen this numerous times where direct competitors to ours will sit down over a coffee at a Starbucks or a Pete's, and we'll share war stories and trade. We almost find that by sharing with one another, we kind of lift both boats.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that very, very strongly too. There's like an openness to, and like you said, you can get people who worked at HP or Intel or Cisco, and you can get new people who work at Facebook, and you have all these different generations even of experience that are connected.
There's a pay it forward mentality in the Valley that I think is better than anywhere else I've ever found.
Yeah, that's great. When you were a kid growing up in Reno, Nevada, what were you like as a kid? And like what kind of signs would you have seen that the Mark Gainey, who's the adult that is sitting in this chair, what kind of connection do you see between that and you as a boy?
Yeah, so Reno's it is a unique place. I'll be the first to acknowledge.
Biggest little city.
Biggest little city in the world.
Yeah.
And I remember I went off to college back east, and when I went there and started meeting friends there, the first thing they'd always ask is, "Wait, people don't live in Reno? Do they pass through it?" But no, as a childhood, the story I always share is that when you're growing up there, starting in elementary school, we had PE at the ski resort every Wednesday.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's if you love the outdoors, there really isn't a better place in the world. So I was skiing from the time I could practically walk. My summer jobs were always in Lake Tahoe. I mean, I still argue my best jobs were pumping gas and working on boats on the west shore of Tahoe. So for somebody who enjoys the outdoors and running and cycling and skiing and things like that, that's really what defined me. It's what got me into college. I was able to go on scholarship as a runner and then ultimately a rower. And I think to your point, if you define then my professional life or my adult life, it always comes back to that connection to sport.
Yeah, definitely. How did you, so what did you run when you were in high school, and then how did you make the transition to rowing in college?
Yeah, so I was a distance runner, so I loved cross country. As long as I didn't have to get on that track and go around in circles, I was happy.
880.
Yeah, no, that wasn't good. And I was pretty successful there. So I was recruited to run cross country at Harvard. This was in the late 80s. But there's something unique about Harvard, which is that once you're there, you're not tied to that program. And so what crew does, they're pretty clever. The crew coaches, at least back in the 80s, was to go and start looking at all the other sports programs and recruiting from them. So they negotiated with the track coaches and the cross-country coaches, and I made the switch, which for me was great, just for a very nice group of guys that were on a cross-country team and a really fun team, and then a world championship boathouse.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to have that experience at Harvard was pretty special.
I love rowing on the on the Charles River. I can shut my eyes sometimes and just see myself on a summer day when it's just perfectly glassy and there's no one else out there. It's
Yeah. No, there's something in rowing that people call it, we call it swing, which is when you're in a certain rhythm in the boat, and to find that, it's better than any experience I've ever had in my life. It's really special. Unfortunately, it's rare. So much so that once I left Cambridge and came back to the West Coast, I frankly decided, I'm going to retire from rowing. The Charles was too good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there's something like swing, and for me, high school basketball, being able to dunk a basketball, there's just like an amazing feeling with that. There's an amazing feeling with that swing. In surf, there are those moments where time just stands still.
That's right.
Do you still have those kinds of experiences? Now that you're in your middle age.
Well, my son Jake's up there. He knows right now I'm hiding another injury that I don't have. The swing's not as frequent as I'd like. Probably. In all fairness, I think you search for it in different ways. At Strava, we have what we call our ABCs. We have it's the ABCs of the company. It's kind of the core values. There's an A, a B, and 3 C's, and the B is balance. And so instead of swing, we talk a lot about what balance looks like and how you try to find balance in a place like Silicon Valley, which frankly can be challenging.
Well, I even just think for our kids, it's so hard to find that balance, and there's so many things that you could do that everything's like you're losing everything because the opportunity cost of doing anything means you're missing out on something else.
That's right.
So what are the ABCs though? I think they might be helpful for all of us. What's A?
Sure. So A at Strava is authenticity. So quick background. We started this company about 10 years ago now, eight years ago. My co-founder, Michael Horvath, has been my best friend for 20 plus years. We met on the crew team together. And again, background. So Strava it's a software company headquartered here in San Francisco, 150 folks who work there. And we're really dedicated to supporting the world's athletes. Now, when we define an athlete, trust me, anybody in this audience is an athlete.
Do I make the cut?
I gave you a kudo this morning on Strava,
good.
Quietly. So if you're out being active, which is what we're really trying to champion, let's just see if we can promote a more active world. We know that good things happen. And for us personally, we had experienced that. We'd experienced it on the crew team. We saw what it was like to forget the competition and the racing. It was the camaraderie. It was the esprit de corps. It was the hard work. It was the work ethic. It was the coaching. It was the sweat the failures that go along the way that really makes it worth it. And our only problem for Michael and I was we graduated and poof, it disappeared. So we actually have a business plan that dates all the way back to 1995. It wasn't called Strava at the time, but it was a company that we were dedicated to creating this virtual locker room, this place where fellow athletes or people who were inspired by just participating in sports could come together on the web.
Yeah.
Took us a little while to get it started, but when we did in 2009, one of the things that we said, which is where the authenticity comes from, which is let's be dedicated to our audience. Let's know who our customer is, and let's really try to meet their needs. And we found that rather than trying to make athletes faster or fitter or stronger, the thing that we needed personally as athletes was just inspiration, just to stay motivated.
Yeah.
And so we were dedicated to this idea of how do we make this fun? And how do you keep it entertaining so you can keep people coming back? And so authenticity was a big part of that. Let's speak to cyclists in an authentic way, or runners, or skiers, or surfers today. Now we serve 31 different sports.
Oh, that's great. And so what's B in that?
So B is the balance.
Balance.
And that's an argument that frankly, if we're out to encourage the world to be more active,
Right.
as a company, we'd better live that.
Right,
And
right.
so you'll find, it's a great place to show up at Strava. You'll find an awful lot of Lycra and sticky running shoes and things like that. But we encourage people to go out at noon and go run. There's always the Wednesday Wow, which is Workout Wednesdays or things like that. And you don't have to be fast or athletic to be at Strava, but you probably enjoy sweating a little bit.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's the B.
Yeah, and the C's.
Then we have 3 C's. We have camaraderie, which I referred to earlier. The idea of, again, having each other's back. We're on one team, and there's no role that's more important than another. And so we really promote this idea of a relatively flat organization where you are, go be a self-starter, go get things done. There's craftsmanship. So we happen to be in a business, the way that we generate money is we actually have a premium offering for our athletes. So we don't have advertisements, things like that. So because of that, we have to have something that is of high quality, and we take pride in the kind of software that we create. So craftsmanship is a big part of what we do. And then the 5th is commitment.
Yeah.
It's just this idea of, are we committed? And do we know what we're trying to strive for? Strava means to strive in Swedish. My business partner has got deep roots in Sweden, and so to strive at Strava is an important philosophy.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
commitment is sort of that same thing. What are we striving to go and accomplish?
Things must have just changed so much. I mean, you said 8 years ago. Is that, yeah, 2009 was when you started. I mean, so that was before. I mean, 2009 is when I got my. That's when the iPhone started, right?
It did, although we did not start as a mobile company.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
So how did it work making the transition from the Garmin devices to being using the cell phones?
Yeah, so again, a little bit of background. If you think about Strava and what actually happens on Strava, if you think about someone's experience on Facebook, where you post your child's birthday photos, or Instagram, where you'll post a photo of something you've kind of done. At Strava, what you do is you post your activity. And so the way that you do that is that you capture it either on a watch or a heart rate device, or even your phone now, or your phones are all smart enough to do that. And so we have apps on the phone that allow you to do it. So you go off, you go have a great day, you've gone and run 5 miles, or ridden, or again, been in a surf session. Somehow you capture that information and you upload it to Strava. And so once you've done that, then that's where the magic happens for us. One is we're going to give you lots of feedback, allow you to tell your story to your friends.
Well, you can see the map too. Where
you can see the map. You can see any photos that you might have taken. You can see
height
all the
and
data.
depths that you went, how fast you were moving.
That's right. Speed, elevation, lots and lots. Anybody who's into their data loves the kind of feedback we provide. But we also connect you to all the other folks who probably did something very similar that day. So not that you're racing against them, but you can definitely compare and contrast, and there's leaderboards and all kinds of different ways to inspire people. So some love to compete, and others love to just be by themselves on Strava. So to answer your question, the big change for us, I'd say there's been 2 fundamental ones. One was just the change in technology, where when we started, we had to use someone's third-party device. There's a company called Garmin that's probably the most popular, and they build little computers that you can put on your bikes or on your wrist. And we'd use that for GPS. That's right. So you're capturing the geolocation where you are. And we would learn how to take that information, plug it into a computer, and then have you look at that on a website. If you fast forward today, the vast majority of everyone just interacts with Strava on their mobile phone. They capture their information on their phone, and then they look at it afterwards. So the whole notion of mobile was game-changing for us. And that really happened in 2011, 2012. Then the other piece for us that's been really fascinating.
And when that happened, I mean, it basically sorted out the people who were in your area too. So I mean, it was an opportunity for you to kind of rise to the next level, and the other companies that weren't able to adopt that technology as quickly or readily, were lost, right?
That's right. In fact, that's the other thing I was going to say, was the big change that we then saw was just the mix of our customer base, our members, we refer to them, or our athletes. When Strava started, we were serving some close friends that we had here in the Bay Area, and frankly, where my business partner is, which is in Hanover, New Hampshire. So we had this funny sort of
big places.
Yeah. And to this day, we still maintain a great office in Hanover, but the vast majority of folks are here. But what happened was, having served that small group of sort of intimate folks, when we went mobile, we became an international company overnight. Now 80+% of our members are outside of the United States. Every continent on the planet. We have uploads going on in Antarctica and Spain and Tokyo, you name it. And we went from serving a few dozen athletes to, I mean, now we add 1 million athletes about every 30 to 40 days.
Yeah, yeah.
So just the rate of growth that we've experienced now in recent years is something that we never anticipated.
So you learned things both about the world. I mean, because you probably learned things about the geography. You can probably tell, you know, if someone's going to be biking in Portland, Oregon, you can tell, and they're going to Chatham, another small town near Portland. You can tell what the likely route is going to be because you'll know about the Earth so much more because you know where people are going on it, right?
It's been a fascinating process to go through to sort of see what you can discover once you have all this information available to you. So you're right. It's I'm always careful to remember we're not looking at an individual's activity,
right,
so
of course.
we're
but you can tell,
focused
say,
on privacy.
20% of the people who travel from Daly City to San Francisco on Wednesdays are going to, go on one particular route.
That's right. We actually have a whole division now at Strava that's called Strava Metro, where we work with, frankly, most of the major metropolitan areas across the world. So places like New York City or London or Melbourne, or any of these major metropolitan areas where we sit down with them and we can actually look at what we're called heat maps.
Exactly.
And understand what the traffic patterns are like for everybody who's cycling and running in their city. But we can look at those traffic patterns depending on time of day, time of year. Is it rush hour? Is it Monday morning at 9 a.m.? Turns out that that's very different in London than a Saturday afternoon at 3.
Yeah.
And so we're now working with, in their case, Transport for London, to help them move people through the city in a way that they can share the roads.
I think of that so often. I mean, the routes I take are obscure places, and sometimes I'm a little resentful of cars that are just pushing so hard when we have 3-lane streets that go one direction, which are perfect for cars, but you can't ride a bike on those. Well, you could theoretically, but
perfect example. San Francisco is a great example. If you were to use Google Maps for your bike ride through, it will route you on the shortest route. It makes complete sense. By using Strava data, the cyclists know what the safest routes are. We know where the potholes are, we know where the one-way streets are and where to avoid. And so by using the heat, we can better guide a cyclist or a runner through the city in a way that is simply safer.
And flatter too.
Flatter, just exactly. The cyclists just pattern-wise, they figured it out. So we're able to surface that.
Yeah, and so that's one kind of thing. And then you'll also know more just about people in general. Like, what surprised you about? I mean, one of the things I'm surprised about is I'm pretty much in the middle of the pack when I compare everybody's times. And I kind of like that. I'm not trying to win the world record.
That's right.
But being last, I guess, wouldn't bother me so much. But what do you learn about people from this data that is?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. I think a couple things. One, just the difference in the way in which people participate in their sports. We had not anticipated how social cyclists are.
Yeah.
It's really not about racing. They don't sign up for races, but it's an inherently social sport where they'll go out with whether it's one or two friends, where they're on a dedicated team or just their group of buddies on the weekend. It very much revolves around ending up at a coffee house somewhere.
Yeah,
it's about the coffee at the end of the ride.
Beer or something.
And so what's fascinating is you can see this not by talking to the athletes, but you can actually see it in the data. So I'll give you another example. We'll look at something like San Francisco, and we can see all the popular routes. So here it's go across the bridge, go up into the Marin Headlands, go maybe around Stinson, something like that, and come back. But we can also, the other thing that we would do at Strava is we would, instead of looking at where they move, we just simply ask the system, where are cyclists stopping for 10 minutes or longer?
Of course.
And so you have what are called these hot stops.
Yes.
And then we overlay that with information from other companies. So we'll use a company like Foursquare or Yelp. And sure enough, that hot stop turns out to be a local bike shop or your local Pete's or something to that. And so we can begin to really expose, here are these great, or maybe it's just a great vista where you can take a photo. And so we're able to share that now with future cyclists around, hey, here's a really fun route and here's the places that you want to take advantage of as you go. And you can again, it just wasn't possible to see without
Oh, of
sitting
course.
down with somebody who'd done it in the
Well,
past.
some of it is where you wouldn't think about it before. Do you know what I mean? It's just like once you have the data, it just makes other things possible. It's funny, there must be hot spots at the local library for me. Like the main place I stop.
right.
You know, technology's changed so many sports, and I want to just give you an example of one way that it's changed surfing. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but you know, so before it was possible to upload videos to the internet, if you were living on the island of Maui, no one would notice you as if you were a great surfer. You know, people pretty much go to Oahu, and you'd have to leave Maui in order to make a name for yourself. And not only that, but you wouldn't really even know what other people were doing. So you couldn't learn the tricks that other people were doing. So when videos began to be uploaded to the internet, a community of surfers in Maui just was able to see what everybody else in the world was doing, replicate it, and advance it. And it's a way that the technology has really made possible something for somebody in a kind of remote, off the beaten track location. I wonder, just, you know, when you're adding 1 million users every 40 days and there's 80% of them are outside of the US, like if there's a similar effect in giving other athletes in other places a chance, or if that's just not even part of this.
No question. I'll give you one story as an example. There was a professional cycling team here in the US based on the East Coast that was looking for a competitive advantage, trying to figure out a way to just boost the performance of their team. So they came to us a number of years ago and said, hey, we'd love to run a competition where let's just open the potential for someone to join our team, but based on how they perform on Strava.
Wow.
And so over the course of a few months, regardless of where you were in the world, you could upload your data, and there were professional coaches who were looking at this stuff to verify the fact the person was being consistent and so forth. And they were able to narrow it down. So it turned into a competition, and they narrowed down these 3 that they brought together and could make sure that there was a good cultural fit and so forth, but use that data. So we've seen it very specific that way, where someone's actually used a platform like Strava to sort of focus in on competition. I'd see more broadly.
And that, I'm going to, even before you go further, it gives people a chance, because otherwise you get to know people at the local bike shop, and they're the ones who get a chance to be on the team. And somebody who's just working so hard in Wyoming, but no one sees it, now they have a chance.
Yeah.
And so then you're going to say the more global.
What I was going to say is what we've found has been fun is to also explore what actually motivates someone, what inspires someone. And so oftentimes it's also not necessarily the best performance that you're trying to peak for, but just someone who's got I'll keep using the anecdotes. So I'll give
I like
give you
the stories. They're the best.
So here's
you
another.
might hear them in the sermons next few weeks.
Well, there we go. See, 2 for 1. So here's one for you. It gives you a sense of sort of what can happen. So 47-year-old mountain biker on Strava, living down in Texas. And he's having a great time with all of his buddies, uploading every week. And there's kind of, again, what can happen on Strava is there's kind of the friendly trash talking that goes back and forth.
Right,
so these guys are all sort of talking it up, and they're competing with their own little group. So it's just amongst a group of about 10 of them. And he does exceptionally well against all of his buddies, with one exception, which is that his heart rate was always 20 beats higher than his friends. So he was faster, but his heart rate was higher. And he was trying to figure out, well, is that the correlation? Is that why I'm beating them? But he felt like I should be getting in better shape. My heart rate shouldn't be that high all the time. And he kept looking at it. He went to his primary care physician and he said, I wouldn't worry about it. You got an athlete's heart. You know, you're feeling great and so forth. So he kept going. But it still nagged at him. Every time he'd open up Strava, he'd see this one disconnect, this one piece of information that just didn't seem right. So a very long story short, he ended up going back to a cardiologist. They ran a stress test, and he actually had what's called a widowmaker. He had to have a triple bypass immediately in order to avoid a massive heart attack.
Wow.
And so he did, and then he wrote us this beautiful letter to Strava and just simply explaining that, look, I was completely healthy. I felt great. I was out there. There was
I was winning.
I was winning. I was doing great. But there was this piece of information that was nagging at me, and I owe you, because I'm now back. He wasn't riding at the time. He was just doing walks around his neighborhood. But he said, but I'm back. I'm going to be on my bike in just a short month or so. And without this information in front of me and the context against my friends, I never would have known.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most surprising things to me is that my heart rate varies by like 4 beats, and my time can vary by like 2 seconds. I mean, it's just like you do the same thing, and it's amazing how much we do it the same exact way.
Yeah.
You know, we do learn from each other. That's for sure. You had a lot of experience before coming to Strava, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that too. So when you graduated from college, you had a chance to go anywhere in the world, and you chose to come to the Bay Area. Tell us a little bit about what that was like. I mean, what was Silicon Valley like in 1992, and what are some of the changes that you're seeing in that world?
Sure.
I remember us talking about Google when it was 3 years old.
Yeah.
You're like, they've got to figure out how to make money, and then they did.
Yes, yeah, no question about that. So you're right. So I came here in '91. So again, a quick background: I was an art history major in college. So one of life's great ironies: I've founded 2 software companies, and you don't want me touching any code. Came out here, was fortunate enough, I was hired by a venture capital firm. So I was hired by a firm that was a little unique in that the reason that I had a job coming out of college was that they love to go find companies that were entrepreneurially owned, so privately held, already profitable and growing, and then they like to invest in those. And so it was my job to call companies all day long, talk to entrepreneurs, and convince them to tell me about their business.
Right.
So it was a dream job for a kid coming out of school to just I was once I got comfortable talking on the phone, what I was doing was getting entrepreneurs to tell me their story. So it was a little bit like going to business school, but I got paid to do it.
Yeah.
I did that for 5 years, and I caught the bug to be an entrepreneur. So in late 1995.
What did you learn from those conversations? Like, if you had to sum it up for somebody who wasn't able to be on the phone, because what did those people share in common? 2
great lessons from it was amazing. For all the companies that were doing poorly, there were 1,000 reasons.
Yeah.
1,000 reasons. But the 2 reasons that companies were doing well, I'd come back time and again. One, you'd hear it from the entrepreneurs. They pursued something they were genuinely interested in.
Yeah.
They found a passion, and that allowed them to just go at it day after day after day. So they kept telling me, Mark, if you're going to go be an entrepreneur, pursue something you enjoy.
Yeah.
The second, actually, I owe this more to the venture guys, because they were the ones who pointed it out, but you could see it time and again. When you solve a real problem, even if you're a little tiny startup, people will listen. And so we kept finding these correlations. When there was a real problem in the market, and I expand on that a bit, because it has to be a problem where there's an owner of that problem. And
right.
By the way, they need budget. They need to actually be able to pay for solving the problem. But fundamentally, can you find a problem in an area that you're interested in?
Right.
That's a win.
Yeah.
And so I took that away. When I left in late '95, I'm like, okay, I love sports. I'm going to go find a problem in sports.
Yeah.
Took me a little while, but nonetheless. And there was one company in between there.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about KANA and how that came into being. I mean, it was a revolutionary company. It's had an enormous effect on our lives today.
Yeah, so Malcolm's referring to the first company that I founded in late '95 was called KANA. It was originally KANA Sports. As I mentioned, that was the business plan we had for the virtual locker room. And we were, again, Michael, I mean this in all sincerity. So Michael was the smart one. Michael went off, got his PhD in economics, and was actually a professor at Stanford at the time that we co-founded KANA together. So he was sort of my partner in crime. Stayed in academia, but was willing to co-found at the same time and help me. And at the time, we were like, okay, KANA Sports, how do we go find this problem? What we found was a group of sports companies that had built fairly significant websites. Again, you have to go back to '95, '96. So this is the early days of the internet. And so these are companies like the Nikes and the Trek Bicycles and K2 Skis of the world. And they built websites, but they were scared to death to actually talk to their customers. Because it turned out that they'd spent years building retail channels, basically letting retailers and storefronts deal with the consumer, and they didn't. They dealt with the retailer.
Yeah.
But for the first time with the advent of the internet, it's much easier for us to go to Nike.com and then send an email than it is to try to find a retailer online. So we were talking to them, and they'd spend millions of dollars on their website and not want to talk to the consumer or answer any of these emails. And we had sort of this aha moment. It's like, boy, if we just make it easy to answer those emails, I've got to believe that they'll want to invest more in other things for us in our virtual locker room, because we were hoping that they would be the source of revenue.
Yeah.
Fast forward, it turned out that sports companies weren't the only companies dealing with customer email.
Yeah, serious problem.
It was a problem that faced any business trying to build their presence on the internet. So this was the early days of e-business and There's an acronym called CRM, Customer Relationship Management, and just how do you connect with your customer in a digital world. Most of these companies had built 800 call centers, 800 number call centers and things like that, and the systems didn't work.
Yeah.
So we morphed the business. As a classic entrepreneur, we found a problem, customer email. Wasn't quite the sports area that we love, but it was really fun to build a team around that. And over the course of the next 4 years, we went from 2 guys and a dog. KANA was the name of my dog at the time, so it was the 3 of us. By the time I left in late 2000, about 1,200 employees.
Yeah.
It was a publicly traded company. We were generating hundreds of millions in revenue. It was a good business. It was an enterprise software company, but not the sports company that I had
dreamed
planned
about.
for.
Yeah. So I mean, to experience that kind of growth. I mean, what did you learn in terms of just hiring people? I mean, everybody has to hire somebody or be hired. What advice do you have about that? Like, how do you put your best foot forward as somebody who's trying to get a job, and how do you sift through all the people? I mean, to build that team so that it works. To grow from 2 to 1,200.
Yeah, in 4 years, which I
4
wouldn't
years.
recommend to anybody. So that's my first thing is don't do it.
Don't do it.
If you don't have to. Part of that was through acquisition. So full disclosure, part of that was once we were a publicly traded company and we actually had this sort of capital and market cap, we were able to make acquisitions and things. So we grew too quickly. In hindsight, and I think you were alluding earlier, sort of the changes that have happened. That first dot-com era through the late 90s and early 2000s, there were a lot of lessons learned that I hope we're applying today, although sometimes I see signs of 1999 again. But nonetheless, we grew too quickly. So my first lesson is patience. That old adage of slow to hire and quick to fire, I think is still very relevant today. And I guess I'd bring back a word in terms of how we've approached hiring at Strava, which is authenticity. We found it's better to take the time to get to know someone. We do a lot of interviewing at Strava where it's cross-departmental. So if somebody's coming in as an iOS engineer, they're going to meet people in support. They're going to meet people in marketing. They're going to meet, because that's how we work as a company anyway. So to think that we could isolate people, it's not effective.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice too, just to see how they work in different. And sometimes people have insights from different departments that you may not be able to pick up if you're somebody who just recognizes someone's raw skill and talent. You may not see these other issues. So after you left KANA, you in some ways you're like a normal 20-year-old. When you're in your 20s, you kind of figure out what you stand for, what you're about, what you're going to do. And that was your normal 20s. And then when you left KANA, you had a chance to do that again. How did you get back to that dream of Strava? How did you figure that out and figure out what you were going to do after having sold that first company?
So in some respects, I owe it to a silver lining. And that's because there was a bit of a dark cloud. So there was this period, I left in late 2000, KANA, and I didn't officially start. Michael and I began working on Strava in the summer of 2006, but it wasn't until 2008, 2009 that we officially launched with a team.
Yeah, I remember when Strava was a name, and you didn't know what it was going to be. We were teasing you about that.
Yes. So full disclosure here, Malcolm and I go way back. We've known each other as long as I've had twins. I've got twin boys that are 16, and Malcolm was kind enough to baptize them back in 2002, I believe it was. So known each other a long time. So you've seen me through these chapters. And there was a chapter where professionally what I did after I left KANA was to serve on a lot of boards and advise companies, and I equated to eating an awful lot of junk food because it tastes really good in the moment, but it's not terribly satisfying. You're not building something yourself. But it was a great experience for me. I was literally on public companies in South Korea, so trust me, the idea of being on, traveling, knowing that I had to be there and back in 3 days' time, knowing that you do not want to get stuck in the Seoul International Airport because there's an issue with the public company, and so no directors are allowed to leave. I learned a lot of valuable lessons around that. But I also had this funny dark cloud where, personally, we just had a bunch of health issues with our family. And in my case, I had a bicycle accident that it cost me 11 surgeries to sort of get back into a place where I could comfortably ride and run. And that was pivotal. I think that to me, to realize just how close you could be away from not having that as part of my life, and realizing that without sports, I'm frankly not a very good person. And it's not about the competition. It's just by being active, I think more clearly. I think I'm a better dad and a better partner and a better friend. And so going through that period of time where I was in and out of the hospital and going through the injuries and so forth, it reinforced this notion. Michael, my co-founder, had gone through something similar in his family. Right. His wife, Anna, was diagnosed with cancer, and so they were dealing with that. And I think both of us realized, A, we were too young not to be working, and B, if we're going to do something, we need to have impact. And this is what was important to us. And it's, like I said earlier, let's pursue what we genuinely enjoy. And so that's where Strava came back.
Yeah, you offered to give me your bike, and that's why I knew you were really bad.
There was a time when I was definitely...
I didn't take it.
No, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny because I don't think I completely understood it until this moment. Just, there's just a lot of individual work that both of you had to do kind of on yourselves before you could continue with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big thing. There's been a lot of talk just about Silicon Valley's been just in the news a lot, just like about ethical issues. I just think about the whole stuff that was going on at Uber, issues about women in Silicon Valley. I wonder what you think of when you see those headlines, because I mean you must know a lot of the people that are referred to in these articles.
Oh, yeah. It's diversity. At Strava, so I'll be very specific to Strava, and it's hard for me to speak to other companies since I don't live those. One of the things that happens when you're immersed in your own company is you end up with these blinders on.
Right.
So it's very hard for me to comment on what's going on at other places and so forth, because frankly, other than catching the quick little snippets in my Instagram feed or something like that, I don't know. I can speak to sort of what's happened at Strava. And I would say it's been a sea change from what I experienced. I'm going to show my age here, but these were issues that we just didn't think about in 1998, 99 when we were building KANA at all. But here's the things that we think a lot about. I mean, we look at everything from the gender mix inside our company, the racial mix. We're very cognizant of, because we're trying to serve this global population of, as you alluded to earlier, very different kinds of people worldwide. How do we create an environment inside Strava that can mimic that, or at least give us the sense of diversity that's required so that we're serving a global audience? So we're sensitive to it, to the point where we actually have an entire group. It's called DIG at Strava. It's Diversity and Inclusivity Group, and it's a cross-functional group that really is an overlay across the organization to ensure that whether we're building features inside the product or, frankly, even launching a video. I'll give you an example of a tough thing that happened to us just a couple years ago. We launched videos about twice a year to try to, again, just give a flavor of sort of Strava's brand and what we stand for. And there was one a few years ago that we took tremendous pride in. It was highly curated, it was well done, it represented our athletes. We'd gone globally around the world to videotape members of the Strava community. And from the minute it was launched, even internally, people were like, but it feels too white and it's too male.
Right.
Now you have to recognize Strava at the time had our primary focus was on cyclists, because that's where we launched, was in the cycling community. So when you just look at that marketplace, I hate to say it, but by definition, it's about 90% white male who ride bikes, at least in any kind of athletic way. Commuting in China is a different thing, but so we had this problem where the market we were actually addressing is not diverse to begin with.
Right.
But it didn't matter. We needed to be part of the change, not part of what the historical part had been like. And particularly now that we're moving across all these different sports, and running is a great example where, frankly, the statistics show us it's majority female are participating. And so how do we move the company to a model where we can look and feel that way and be empathetic to the diversity? So what it's meant for us is the way we operate, using DIG as sort of that overlay and being very conscious of it. We're a small company that's taken stands on just about everything that's out there. We signed the amicus brief, whether you like it or not, when it came to the immigration issues. So we're front and center on those things. And I've come to appreciate as an executive in a company, taking a vocal position on the things that are important to us, even if it means alienating some of our members, has been an important part of running this company. And that wasn't the case early.
It feels like with the Trump administration being in place, it seems like a lot of folks that I know in Silicon Valley are much more likely to take a more explicitly political position. What are some of your other fellow colleagues as CEOs saying just about where they think the Trump administration's taking us, and what are some of the issues that are most of highest importance to them?
I think that the challenge we face seems like one of it's so fundamental. We're at this pivotal moment in time where it's one around: are you willing to embrace a global society, or do you believe that we have to move into a nationalistic environment and clan? And look, I have to speak to serving my community. My community does not have borders. My community, as I mentioned earlier, my customers, 80% of them don't live in the United States.
Right, exactly.
So we are there to serve this global community. We employ people across the globe now. We have people working throughout Europe. I head to Brazil on Friday with an intent of hiring for Brazil. That's our third largest country. There's the United States, there's the UK, and then there's Brazil in terms of the people we serve. So it starts right there. It starts with this. The challenge we have is we don't believe you can escape this notion of being a global community.
Right.
And we don't hear that from the Trump administration. So we're at odds just in the sense that when he says he wants to create better jobs or things like that, this is the other issue. He wants us to hire. Folks, we have tons of openings at Strava. We're 150 people, and we're trying to hire another. If we could hire another 50 today, we would do it. We can't find the talent here. It's really expensive to here. There's just not enough of what we need. We're opening offices in other parts of the country. We're trying to think about what we do in Europe. But we want to hire here. We want to create jobs in the United States, and we can't do that. So, sorry, it's a long answer to your question, but I think for us it's fundamentally that nationalistic versus the global, where by definition of the success of Strava, and frankly just philosophically, it's hard for me to stop just because the border has this fictitious line on it.
And that's helpful, because I think sometimes we just have such a knee-jerk response. We read the headline or hear the next thing that comes out, and there is this sense of just like response in a very visceral way. And it's helpful to just the 30,000 foot perspective is, our society is globalizing and changing, and you're right. Do we try to work with that, or do we try to somehow prevent it from happening? And it just seems to me it's almost impossible to prevent.
There's a great book that we've shared with everybody who works at Strava. It's called Built to Last. It was written by Jim Collins back in the late 90s. So it's an old business book. But one of the things I loved about him was that he did a study of a lot of the companies that had sort of withstood the test of time, had really done well over decades. And one of the things that we always refer back to is he's got a great phrase of, it's either the tyranny of the or the genius of the and. And what he's referring to is too many folks say it's either this or this. It has to be one or the other. And his point was great companies, and I think even great nations, figure out it's not either or. It's how do you do this and that. And so I believe, frankly, for someone who lives in Silicon Valley, I'm probably as conservative as they come in many respects. I am absolutely an American citizen. I take in tremendous pride. I know the amazing gifts that I've been given by living in this country, and I want to see the United States continue to be that leader on that front. So I want America to be great.
Right.
And I want us to be an amazing global leader and help the rest of the countries. Remember how I talked earlier? We live in Silicon Valley where rather than treating my competitor as somebody that I absolutely have to just annihilate and disregard, let me figure out how to, in some ways, cooperate with them at times. And I think that's where we see amazing innovation, is where we rise together and we do it. I still want to beat them. I know who my competitors are. I want to be better than them, but I think that there's a way in which you can do it. And that's the beauty of sport when you think about it when you're out at a race, right? I want to win. I want to be first place. But I love finishing that race and then high-fiving the person who comes in second.
Exactly.
We've kind of missed, we're missing that. And that to me is the genius of
that we all
and.
Did this together. Completely. I mean, and the church is the same issue. The church issue is traditional or to innovate. And you're right. I mean, that or it can be very destructive because we may be able to do both. One of the things that's so fascinating to me, and I don't even know if you intended to do this when you started Strava, but social media has been such an enormous change. And it's part of the story, too. I mean, I don't think that Donald Trump would have been elected if we didn't have the social media landscape that we have. I mean, we're not getting our news from major television networks anymore. It is a much more complicated picture with social media. And I wonder if you have any insights or any thoughts about just how it's changed so far. I can imagine us looking back and saying, oh, do you remember in 2012 we were so naive about social media in such and such a way? How would you describe how it's changing us and where we're going on it?
Yeah. Well, I have two quick things that pop into my mind. One is the great irony of Strava, which is Michael and I sat down. We remember saying to ourselves, even back again, 2008, 2009, we have got to convince the world to go and be more active, which in our minds meant put your computers down.
Right, completely.
Go outside and go do something.
Yeah, you're really concerned about obesity and we want people to be more healthy.
Exactly. So there was our mission. Yet here we were creating software that somehow we still needed you to look at. I mean, so there's a tremendous sort of irony or tension that we still feel today at Strava, because we want people to go out and be active and disconnect in some respects.
Right.
And, I always, one of the things I love is I'll start Strava and then I just put it in my back pocket.
Yeah.
And I'll enjoy my ride and the vista and the friends and the conversations. And then when we finish, one of the great things is to then relive it and go through. So, but we're trying to find that. So for us, social media, even the phrase social network for athletes has always come at a bit of a cost for us, because we're not trying to recreate Facebook by any stretch of the imagination. We have very much a mission around sort of how these activities can have a positive impact. But I think we've come to appreciate just the way in which our own behaviors are changing. This is the other thing that pops in my mind. I'm thinking of my two boys.
Right. Well, that's exactly where I was going.
And thinking about what I was like at 16 years old and where I spent my free time and so forth, and where they spend their free time. And I would argue that, again, it's not the genius of it's the genius of the and, that we simply are learning how to operate in a way where this is now part of them. And I keep referring there to Jake, who's in the audience today, but there are times where it looks as though that device is literally physically attached to their body, right? We all know but I'm appreciating sort of the way in which it's able to integrate. The kind of conversations I'll have, I'll use even the conversation yesterday. We happened to be in a car for 3 or 4 hours, and the news, the timeliness with which they get information, the way in which, frankly, they're much more mature for 16 than I ever was. Yeah. The questions that they're asking me about global politics, it wouldn't happen without, frankly, their Snapchat.
Right.
And so that's where I keep coming. Maybe I'm the eternal optimist. As an entrepreneur, you just always are a believer that you can make it better and it's going to work if you give it enough time. I'm a huge believer in sort of what these technologies can do. We have to be cognizant of what the downside is, and we have to have the ability to at least talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. One of our traditions at the forum is that we take questions on note cards. So if you'd like a note card, Rebecca is collecting all the questions. So she'll convey them to me. Okay. I was wondering if you had rules around your house, just around technology use, for the boys. I mean, or just how you figured those out. I mean, I think, when Jake and Charlie are having kids, it's going to be a different scene, and they'll know better what to do than we did. It's almost like those rules about parenting just haven't been established yet. But I wonder if you have any insight about that.
Jake probably has a different answer than I do. So I don't look at it as I got a whole lot of rules. There are a couple funny ones. The phones don't end up in the bedrooms that night. There are some sanctuary places, including my own, where just like, let's plug them in downstairs. Yeah. And we go. So there's simple things there. I've never worried so much about how much time they're on or off, but I know, since Jake's in the audience, there's been plenty of times where it's really nice outside and I'll see him on the couch. I'm like, come on, guys, there's got to be something else you can do. So it's been much more informal that way. The most interesting one that happened, it just happened here in the last couple months. This is my other son, Charlie. So the one thing that changed was at 16, they both got their driver's licenses in July. And so there's a fierce sense of independence that they now have as they have, and we were all excited for this. And I had a request, which was there's an app that you can put on your phone. It's called Life 360. And it just simply allows all of us as a group to know where we are at any point in time. And so I thought, oh, this will be good. I'd like to have this as sort of a safety feature that when you guys are off driving back and forth, I'm divorced, so they go back and forth between our two homes and school and so forth. I'd like to have this on all of our phones so that we can just know where each other are and if something comes up. And to Jake's credit, who's in the audience, he's like, no problem, Dad.
Yeah.
Charlie was passive aggressive. Charlie kept saying, yeah, no problem, Dad, no problem. And then he wouldn't
put it on
his phone.
Oh yeah,
he wouldn't he just simply wouldn't put it on. And it became this ongoing discussion, like, Charlie, Life 360. Now, ultimately, we had a great conversation because what he was able to share with me, he's like, Dad, I just feel like I just earned this major independence, and you're taking it away by putting me on your phone.
Wow.
And so we had a really good heart-to-heart about it. And at the end of the day, he put it on his phone because I was able to explain. I compromised and said, look, if you feel that this becomes creepy, if you think that I'm stalking you, come and talk to me and we'll change it. But right now, I'd like to try it because there's just certain instances where it is really important for you to know where I am and for me to know where you are, and can we try it? And so by willing to, rather than a rule, just saying, hey, can we experiment, he was willing to do it. Now, Jake may have an opinion as where Charlie is on this, but that's a good example of about as close to a rule as
it is. And I those are two of my favorite. I mean, Strava's I think my favorite thing about my phone, and my second favorite thing about my phone is just being able to. Oh, look, Heidi's at her office right now. I love that stuff. Even and sorry, honey. All right. Could you say a little bit more about why you can't find people to hire here?
Oh. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, there's two pieces to that. I think that the primary one is we happen to be in a phase right now where sort of funny, just what I've seen happen at startups and early stage companies. The earliest days, you love to just hire what I call those A players, folks who they can just be great at anything, but they just have a work ethic that's beyond reproach. And that's great early on. And meaning like your first 5 to 10 folks, you just have and you just get a ton of stuff done. Then you move into a phase, and it's a little bit like if you were I apologize, I'm going to use a sports analogy, but it's a little bit like you had a sandlot football team that you're all having fun on a Saturday afternoon, and you realize you're pretty good, and so you actually want to go and become professional. Like you want to go think about winning the Super Bowl. Well, it turns out if you want to win a Super Bowl, you need to have specialized talent on the field. You can't just all want to play quarterback. You have to have people who love playing offensive linemen and blindside and somebody else. And Strava is in kind of that same place where we're hiring very specific skill sets. User design or user experience experts, iOS engineers, so specifically the operating system that operates on an iPhone. And then there's also Android. So you have to have Android specialists and iOS specialists. So there's a level of technical talent and technical background, and we're not at a place yet where we're large enough where we can bring perhaps folks who have less experience, but we can train them. We're just not there. We'll get there. I think we're confident that over time you can build the infrastructure and you have the systems in place. But right now we're still looking for a level of experience where frankly we're competing for those same folks from the likes of Facebook and Apple and Uber and Twitter and the big names out there. And so that's what's challenging. We'll often find the person, and then there's a compensation challenge. And that, I'd say, is the other piece to this, is just the cost structure that exists in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area is challenging. And Strava is still a privately held business, so we don't have opportunities for liquidity. We don't have a public stock and things like that. Those are the two drivers that make it challenging.
Well, I was even just thinking about your whole conversations with the different cities. Like, like who is going to be that person who's going to be the expert on, urban design, urban planning, those kinds of things. And so you have probably these particular positions that are just like they're singular. There's no one else in the world that has that exact job.
That's right. That's right. We have been very fortunate. We've hired from our community. That's been the one. You look for that person who has a passion for what you're doing, and that's been. We've had a lot of other companies come to us, talking to us about recruiting and so forth. Like, we have this built-in mechanism that's a little bit unfair.
So you have
but
millions of
we
users.
have millions of folks
who understand and appreciate
and are
Strava.
constantly looking at our job boards, looking for an opportunity.
That's good.
But again, they're probably not located here.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to figure out how we might be able to take advantage of that.
Here's a question. What is your religion? How does it help your business expansion?
So I was raised Episcopalian. My parents were Episcopalian and went to St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Reno, Nevada for many, many years. And then, as Malcolm knows, so again, as I mentioned earlier, we got to know each other when Malcolm became the rector at Christ Church down in Los Altos. And did my part on the vestry there.
That's right.
We were just talking the other day about
when you're talking about your board experience, I wanted you to mention that you designed the strategic plan.
One of the most challenging boards I ever was on was the vestry at Christ Church.
Well, that makes me feel so much better. I thought that it was just me.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that makes me feel much better.
That was good. So that's my religious background.
Yeah, that's great. One of the questions I had written for you ahead of time was just, what you learned in church as a kid. How did that affect kind of your later career? Do you know what I mean? I can tell you exactly what our kids are learning from church.
I guess I think it's a piece of it. I think it's funny. Sorry, it's not that I'm hemming high. I know what the answer is, but I have to give credit to a number of places. My father was a physician. My mom was stay-at-home. I think the church, along with all of that and just having a great upbringing, I use the word compassion, empathy.
Yeah.
I think that the church was a piece of that.
Yeah.
And I hope that that's when people talk about either myself or Strava or our own family, that's something that is important to us.
Yeah.
Just caring for others.
Yeah,
I'm hesitating because I hadn't thought about it in terms of that framework, but there's no question that was what church was back then.
Yeah.
I don't remember the services as much as you remember sort of the fun events, whether it was Halloween night. I mean, that's what's going through my head is the funniest things, but just those social settings where you were comfortable and with a group of people that you wouldn't otherwise interact with. That was the other thing I really appreciated about church was it wasn't my Monday through Friday group.
Yeah, and that it's one thing to say, pick up the phone, call the entrepreneurs when you're, 22 years old, and you do you have to interact with all these people you didn't choose. And church is, all different ages, all different situations, different experiences. It is a really good way for, being thrown together with people and learning, what motivates them, what moves them. So yeah, I definitely think about that. I also think Mark has a hidden talent that he never shares publicly, but you can say this church service in your head before the priest says it, and so quickly that you could actually loop back to the whole beginning of the service.
We all know the Episcopal service is, if there's one thing, we do it the same, we do it every time.
Well.
No,
so here's another question that I was dying to ask you, and I'm so glad somebody else thought of this. What has been your scariest moment at Strava, and what's been your biggest surprise at Strava?
Scariest moment, I think the scariest moment was a situation back very early in our time, probably 2010 now. There was a cyclist who was a member of Strava who died, who was actually descending a hill in the Berkeley foothills at the time, and he was going very fast. He crossed over the double yellow line. He lost control and hit an SUV. He was 41 years old. He was a single man. He passed away. And we heard about this, and it happens, unfortunately, in the Bay Area, folks, whether you see this or not, it happens every weekend. I mean, we lose cyclists here on a very regular basis, and I'm just talking about the Bay Area worldwide. There just was one yesterday.
Oh, I know.
Jake and I were just reading this morning.
Yeah.
There was a major event taking place up in Marin, and a pickup truck took out 4 cyclists.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to figure out, he was a hit and run. He left the scene, and by all accounts, they're saying it was intentional. So we lose cyclists a lot. In Strava's case, it became a double whammy because not only did we lose a member that we felt, but his parents turned around and sued us for wrongful death and accused us of creating an environment that was unsafe for him as an individual. And so it was scary in the sense that Michael and I had to reflect hard on, you've heard why we created this, the exact opposite. And so to be in a place where you could think about the very two binary reactions. Do we shut this down and sort of acknowledge that, boy, we were mistaken?
Yeah.
Or frankly, wait, do we fight this and say, look, and I won't get into the details. Ultimately, we decided to defend ourselves, and we won.
Yeah.
It was actually thrown out. And we put a lot of thought into what are the safety protocols, how do we want to continue for the community to grow in such a way, and knock on wood, thankfully we haven't had incidents since that time. We still see members, unfortunately, die. It would not surprise me. I don't think the person lost his life yesterday. We hope not. But we learn about this weekly on the members, so that's the tough one.
Yeah. I remember when that happened. It was just a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Does Strava track or explore the diet and nutrition habits of users and the effect of this on performance?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's a big piece of the puzzle for anybody who's involved in sports. Specifically, the answer is we do it through partnerships. So we haven't designed any technology that takes into account sort of what's happening with nutrition, but what we did a number of years ago was to develop a developer program, a way in which other companies and other individuals can access our data. We have about 20,000 API partners today that do all kinds of really fascinating things with it. So there's groups like MyFitnessPal, which is a very popular nutrition and weight loss app, and that integrates with Strava so that you can track your calorie intake and burn and do some interesting things. We've seen university professors dive into this using Strava data. So that's the way we've approached that particular thing, is to do it through partnership.
This is a great question, and I love it. What's the next problem in sports that you'd like to solve? That might be a good one. You should put this in your jacket.
That's right. Oh, and I can tell you there's about 50 answers at Strava. The phrase, in fact, just the last one that you asked, it's an ongoing conversation inside Strava. We often refer to our biggest challenge at Strava. And someone asked earlier the biggest surprise. Biggest surprise is what I call the noise of opportunity. There are so many things that we would love to do for our members that we just simply don't have the time or bandwidth to do. What we're really excited about at Strava, historically, we've been in a place of you've gone out and done an activity and you've posted to Strava, and how do we celebrate that with you? How do we relive that experience? How do we motivate you to go out and try to go be active again? We have so much data now, and so many. I mean, we get between 10 and 15 million activities every week coming into Strava. So we have this amazing sort of knowledge base. So where we're very excited is what we call discovery or explore. How can we, before you go off and do something, how can Strava be your resource to where, like the fact that I'm going to Brazil later this week, I want to be able to land in Brazil, and I want Strava to know I've landed here, and it knows that I love to run, and it should be able to tell me everything from here's some great routes near your hotel to here are the running clubs in the area that you ought to connect with. We've even got a great API partner who developed this great algorithm where you can even find individuals who train in your area, who basically train at the pace that you do, and things like that.
Exactly. Like finding a tennis partner, you know?
Someone said to us, it's Strava plus Match.com, and we've got a winning combination. So,
that's great.
But yeah, that whole notion of discovery and explore is what we're really excited about.
That's neat. What do you see as being the future for technology? Like, we were talking a little bit just in passing when you first arrived here about driverless cars. Just in the same way that in 2003, you may have been able to tell me a little bit about personal computing devices that we'd have in our pockets that would be phones and communications device and cameras. What's coming down the line that's going to change things again for us? Either like the way that cell phones did or social media did or the internet
Yeah. So again, I'm pretty myopic given sort of my world in Strava. So maybe I would refer to, it is really exciting to see what is happening in the world of not just sport, but specifically sort of human anatomy. This whole, we're like at the tip of the iceberg when sort of our ability to track and monitor what's happening to our health systems in real time And so where do I get excited? I get excited at moving. You know, I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a physician's family, a general surgeon. I've had my own sort of health issues. It's always been reactive. I feel like even to this day, I react to a problem in my health rather than this whole notion of wellness, sort of being out in front of it. So where do I get excited technology-wise, given where we live, meaning where Strava and the space where I spend a lot of my time? I think we're just going to see tremendous innovation around that ability to personalize the body's experience, my own personal health experience, and sort of know. The one I love right now is this crazy debate between carbs or no carbs.
Right. Isn't that funny?
And it's like,
it's pretty basic.
Somehow there's an answer that fits everybody. The reality is everybody's probably unique and probably needs something that is unique to their own system, and it depends on where you are in your age, what you're trying to train for, and so forth. But I think we're actually getting closer and closer to a place where we can give that personalized experience to someone, because we can do the right analysis, and we can get the right sensors and so forth to know, and then tailor. Yeah, perhaps you need a high carb, and I shouldn't have any, but we're able to dial that in. That's exciting.
Yeah. And as you say, I mean, you might be able to tell me, just in the same way that the earthquake monitors will be able to give you warning before the earthquake hits, you may be able to give us warning before we have a heart attack.
Right. This notion of sort of mass personalization across any number of these sort of areas, but for us within the health and wellness space is really fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming, Mark. I'm just so grateful that you came all the way up here and early on a Sunday morning, and it's such a blessing for all of us to hear you and to just get a picture into your world and see some of the things that you're thinking about and working on. So thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've got more questions, but I'll have to ask you them when I'm not about to preach.
Fair enough. Yes, we're going to let you go talk. We'll go listen.
Exactly. I'll come down and visit you. So we have we have an artist in residence program, which is just an amazing thing. We're going to have our first poet as artist in residence, Sarah Kay, who's starting she's arriving tomorrow night. So we'll have tons of different events for her. Next week she'll be the forum guest, and the week after that she's going to be the forum host. So please come join us for that. Join us for the 11 o'clock service right after this. We depend on your donations, so there's a little donation box. If you can give us something to help us, that would be great. And thank you very much to Mark Gainey for being here and helping us with our questions about sports in Silicon Valley.
Great.